Here is a number that surprised even me the first time I saw it. Ask most people what they spend on subscriptions in a month, and they'll tell you somewhere around $86. When researchers actually sit them down and add up every line, the streaming, the cloud storage, the app that renewed at 3 in the morning while they were asleep, the real figure comes to 219, more than 2.5 times what they guessed. The firm that ran that study, C+R Research, found something else worth sitting with. About 3 out of 4 people admitted it was simply easy to forget these charges existed. That gap between 86 and 219 isn't a rounding error. It's a window into how money actually works in a person's life. I spent 25 years in finance, and the thing I noticed, watching genuinely smart people who could read a balance sheet, people who ran companies, was that almost none of them were undone by a single bad decision. The big choices, they usually got right. They bought the house carefully. They thought hard about the job offer. What quietly shaped where they ended up was the small stuff. The decisions so minor they never registered as decisions at all. So that's what I want to talk through today. Not the dramatic moves, the quiet ones. The $40 choice you make on a Tuesday and never think about again. And why, over a long enough stretch, those are the ones running the show. Let me explain the mechanism, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. A small monthly choice has 3 things going for it, and all 3 work against you. First, it's invisible. $9.99 doesn't trigger any alarm in your head. Your brain treats it as a non-event, the financial equivalent of a light left on in another room. Second, it repeats. That $9.99 isn't a number, it's a faucet. And a faucet left running for a decade fills a reservoir. Third, and this is the one most people miss, it runs on autopilot. You decided once, maybe years ago, and the decision has been quietly remaking itself every month since, without ever asking your permission again. Researchers have a clinical name for the force behind that third part: inertia. We tend to leave things as they are. A default, once set, has a strange gravity to it, and the people who design subscriptions understand this better than you do. The whole model is built to be small enough to ignore on any given day, spread across enough billing dates that it never adds up in your head, and renewed on a schedule that quietly discourages you from ever looking. None of this requires you to be careless. The architecture does the work. Your only job, as far as it's concerned, is to keep not noticing. Come back to that $219 figure for a moment, because the details are where it gets uncomfortable. In one large survey, around 89% of people underestimated what they were paying. And it wasn't only the total they lost track of, it was the count. More than 4 in 10 admitted they had stopped using a service entirely and kept paying for it anyway, sometimes for months. There's a study floating around that the most commonly forgotten subscription is a streaming service somebody signed up for to watch one thing, finished, and never canceled. I want to be careful here because this is the part where most finance channels start wagging a finger, and that's not my style. I'm not going to tell you to cancel everything. Some of these things are worth the money. If a subscription saves you 2 hours a week, or genuinely makes your life better, keep it without guilt. The problem isn't the spending. The problem is spending you can't see. Money leaving your account every month attached to a decision you haven't actually thought about since the day you made it. A reasonable person can look at a charge and decide it's worth keeping. What no one can do is make a good decision about a charge they've forgotten exists. That's the real cost of the blind spot. It isn't the dollars. It's that the dollars are leaving on autopilot, and autopilot has no opinion about whether you're getting value. Now let me show you a bigger version of the same pattern, because subscriptions are just the obvious case. There's a story I've watched play out more times than I can count. Someone gets a raise. A real one. $15,000, $20,000 a year. They're thrilled, and they should be. Then they do what almost everyone does. They move somewhere a little nicer. They upgrade the car. They start eating out a bit more often. All of it perfectly reasonable. And 2 years later, earning 30% more than before, they have less in savings than they did on the day of the raise. This has a name. Economists call it lifestyle creep, and behind it sits one of the most stubborn facts about human beings: hedonic adaptation. We adjust. Whatever felt like a luxury last year quietly becomes the floor this year. The nicer apartment stops feeling nice and just starts feeling normal, which means the next upgrade has to be nicer still to produce the same small flicker of satisfaction. One writer described the feeling perfectly: earning more than ever and watching his savings account look like it had seasonal depression. He compared it to pouring water into a bucket with a tiny hole in the bottom. You keep refilling it, and it never quite feels full. What makes lifestyle creep so dangerous is precisely that it doesn't feel like overspending. You're not being reckless. You're not blowing money at a casino. You're just living a slightly better version of your life, one reasonable upgrade at a time. There's no single moment you can point to and say, that was the mistake, and so most people never see the trade they're making, which is this: every dollar that gets absorbed into a higher baseline is a dollar that was never going to build anything. It's spoken for before it arrives. The raise didn't disappear. It got quietly converted into a lifestyle you adapted to within about 3 months and then forgot you were paying for. At this point, some of you are thinking about coffee. Good, because we need to talk about it. You've heard the advice. Skip the daily latte, invest the money instead, and 4 decades later, you're a millionaire. It comes from a financial author named David Bach, who wrote a book called The Automatic Millionaire back in 2003 and built it around what he called the Latte Factor. The arithmetic he used is real. $5 a day, invested over 40 years at a healthy return, does grow into something close to $1 million. On a calculator, it checks out. But the advice has been argued about for 20 years, and the people arguing against it have a point I think you should hear, because the truth is somewhere in the middle. The critics, a journalist named Helene Olin wrote a sharp book on this called Pound Foolish, pointed out that for most households, the things really eating the budget aren't lattes at all. They're the fixed costs: housing, healthcare, education, the big recurring commitments that are genuinely hard to cut. Olin's argument was blunt. You can give up coffee every morning for the rest of your life and barely move the needle if your rent and your insurance and your car payment are quietly draining 3/4 of what you've got left over. Another well-known voice in this space, Ramit Sethi, more or less tells people to buy the coffee and stop feeling bad about $4 while ignoring the 4-figure decisions. So who's right? Honestly, both. And once you understand why, you understand the whole topic. Bach was wrong about the prescription. Coffee is a tiny, visible, easy target, and obsessing over it can become a way of feeling responsible while avoiding the decisions that actually matter. But he was right about the principle underneath it, and the critics sometimes throw that out by accident. His real claim was never about caffeine. It was that small, repeated expenses you don't pay attention to add up to amounts that would shock you, and that this works in reverse, too, if you redirect the money. The mistake people make is taking him literally. The coffee was a metaphor. The point was the pattern. Anything small, automatic, and recurring is more powerful than it looks, in both directions. So I'd put it to you this way. The latte itself almost never matters. The category it belongs to matters enormously. Your latte might be 5 subscriptions, or takeout 4 nights a week, or the habit of upgrading your phone every year because the old one started to feel slightly embarrassing. The size of any single charge is a distraction. What you're looking for is the recurring structure, and whether you ever actually chose it. Let me put some real weight behind that, because abstractions don't change behavior. Numbers sometimes do. Take a modest recurring choice, $300 a month. That could be the difference between the car you wanted and the car 1 tier up. $300 a month, invested instead over 25 years at a reasonable return, works out to something in the neighborhood of $250,000. From one recurring decision, not a dramatic one, The kind you'd make in an afternoon at a dealership and feel good about. Even at the smaller end, the math has teeth. Vanguard once ran the classic coffee example honestly. $3.50 a day, a conservative 6% return, 30 years, and landed at around $106,000. Not a million. The original claim was inflated, but $100,000 is not nothing, and it came from an amount most people genuinely don't notice leaving. Now, I want to be straight with you the way I'd be if you were sitting across from me, because I don't trade in fantasy. These numbers assume you invest the difference and leave it alone for decades. They don't account for inflation or taxes or the job loss or the medical bill that every real life eventually throws at you. The point of the figures isn't to promise you $1 million for skipping dessert. The point is the opportunity cost. Every recurring dollar is making a choice on your behalf, either compounding quietly in your favor for 30 years or compounding quietly for somebody else's company. It is never doing nothing. Money is always voting. The only question is whether you cast the ballot or let it get cast for you. Here's the part I actually find hopeful, and it's the reason I'm not a pessimist about any of this. Everything I've described, invisibility, repetition, autopilot, is a force, and a force doesn't care which direction it points. The same inertia that quietly drains your account can quietly fill it if you set the default up to run the other way. There's beautiful research on this. Two behavioral economists, Richard Thaler, who later won a Nobel Prize, and Shlomo Benartzi, designed a program called Save More Tomorrow. The idea was almost insultingly simple. Instead of asking people to cut their spending today, which everyone hates, they got employees to commit in advance to putting a slice of their next raise straight into savings, automatically, before it ever hit their paycheck. Nothing came out of today's money. The saving escalated on its own with each future raise. People who joined saw their savings rate climb from around 3.5% to nearly 14% in under 4 years. And the quiet part? Once they were in, almost nobody bothered to opt out. The same inertia that keeps you paying for a subscription you forgot about kept them saving. That idea worked so well, it eventually became law. Recent U.S. retirement legislation made automatic enrollment and automatic increases the default for most new workplace plans. Governments figured out what the subscription companies figured out long ago. Defaults run people's lives. The only difference is who's setting the default. So the move, if you want one, isn't to white-knuckle your way through a budget on willpower. Willpower loses. It's to do to your savings exactly what the subscription companies did to your spending. Make it automatic. Make it invisible. And let inertia carry it. Set the transfer to leave your account the day you get paid, before you've had a chance to adapt to having the money. You'll adjust to its absence within a few months. That same hedonic adaptation that worked against you on the raise now quietly works for you. You stop feeling the gap. The faucet just runs into your reservoir instead of someone else's. I don't like advice you can't act on by the weekend. So let me give you something concrete. Once a quarter, not once a month, you won't do it monthly, be honest with yourself. Sit down with your last full bank and card statements and read them line by line. Not the summary, the lines. You're hunting for two things. First, anything recurring that you'd forgotten was recurring. Second, and this one's harder, anything you are still using but have never actually decided is worth the money. For each one, the question isn't, can I afford this? Almost everything passes that test, which is exactly why it's the wrong question. The question is, if this weren't already running, would I sign up for it today at this price? If the answer is no, you've found a leak. Cancel it without ceremony. Then, while you're already in there and paying attention, do the opposite thing. Set up one automatic transfer into savings or investments, however small, on the day you get paid. Pick a number that's slightly uncomfortable but not painful. The amount matters less than the automation. You're not trying to be a hero this quarter. You're installing a default that will keep working long after you've stopped thinking about it, which, given everything we've covered, is the only kind of financial decision that reliably sticks. That's the whole game, really. Find the quiet decisions that are working against you and switch them off. Build one quiet decision that works for you and never touch it again. You don't need discipline for this. You need to set the defaults once and let the same force that's been working you over start working for you instead. I'll leave you with the thought I started with, because I think it's the honest one. The shape of your financial life, 10 or 20 years out, is being decided right now, not by some big move you're planning, but by a handful of small monthly choices you've stopped noticing. That's not a warning. It's leverage, because small, automatic, and recurring is the most powerful combination in personal finance, and you get to decide which direction it points. Most people never make that decision consciously. You just did, by watching this to the end. Look at your statements this week. Find the quiet ones. Then set one good default running in your own favor and forget about it. I'm Gray. Money Decisions Made Clear. I'll see you in the next one.